3 as we get here to Friday, March 26th. And I thank you for taking the time, choosing to take the time on a Friday night when it's sunny and 76 degrees. I think we're just about to lose the sun for tonight. We've tried to make it easier for folks to join us. We've got a new sign-up form. So those who get our newsletter get the first access to joining. And that sign-up form is there because we eventually have a limit on how many people can join us. We're nowhere near that limit as we're just starting up, but we want to give that first access. And you have the option to say, hey, just always include me so I always get the link if you do that. We also, for the first time, said, hey, let's create the Facebook event. As long as we're not full, let's make that a possibility. That's why it only comes out a week later, because we just give a little time for the sign-up sheet to get going first. So hopefully those things made it easier. I heard there was a little hiccup and we were late getting the link onto the Facebook page, so I apologize for that. But all that said, I have Matt Landry joining us tonight, and he's freshly back just last night from Las Vegas. And usually they say what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas, but we'll see where the discussions go. What is a safe bet is that I get a chance to thank our sponsor tonight. Now, it doesn't cost us anything to do these, but we are a charity, and when people make significant donations to our cause, we like to give them a thanks with a shout out. And Boston Billiard Club and Casino just announced that they will be giving us a week as their designated charity, April 19th to 25th. And that's a huge benefit to our charity and to the mission work that we do to try to serve people who are sight impaired, both in the guide dog world and in the training services through Future Insight. So all of that said, Boston Billiard Club and Casino will be giving us those dollars from that week. And we encourage you to visit them anytime, but especially during our week, because it'll go directly to help us. So that segue all aside, let's talk about Matt Landry. So Matt is first and foremost a friend, as have all the guests so far been. And Matt is probably the friend I've known the least amount of time, because we didn't get to know each other until after my hiking of the 48. And hiking was one of our first bits of connection. It also continued because he had already been an author, and sharing his process was part of the inspiration for how Tracy and I were able to launch our book. And then we began to have a lot more discussions about life and the journey of kindness and how people can thoughtfully interact in healthy ways. And Matt does an amazing amount of quality work there. I don't think he always calls it work, but the amount of material and interactions he does to help people and causes is pretty powerful. And that's why I said I thought he'd be a great guest. So with that said, I want to welcome Matt. And how are you tonight, Matt?
I am doing well. Thank you very much for having me, Randy.
Well, I'm excited. I got an author who outshines me. I got a hiker who out hikes me. But hiking is part of how we got together, and we hadn't actually hiked, even though we talked about it so much, until we had a presentation scheduled together, which you did a lot to coordinate up at Woodstock Station. And we said, if we're going to present together with Dan, why don't we take a hike together? And the three of us got to hike, it's often called Indian Head, but it's the Mount Pemigewasset. And you did a little bit of guiding. You got a chance to watch Autumn guide me, and we had some great conversations. And, people hike for all sorts of different reasons. And I wonder if you might take the invitation to share a little of what is your reason behind hiking, and what do you get out of the experience?
I guess that's an answer that's changed over time, probably much like it has for yourself. I guess I always grew up out in the woods. I was from the generation that went out to play, so to speak. So it was always great to have that fresh air and that exhilarating experience. But as time started to go on a little bit more, I found myself, like a lot of other people, and this is something maybe we can discuss a little later, is going through a depression. And I found that and it's funny that science is really proving this now, but it's funny that from a mental health standpoint, how much getting out and doing these hikes and hiking mountains in particular have really, really helped me and helped so many others in doing that. So it's funny that that's sort of what it became into. And now I hike simply for the enjoyment. It's the sheer enjoyment. It's a confidence builder. As I wrote a book, Forward, Upward, Onward, some people have read that really, I think that's where I'm at right now, basically, is really, really enjoying that.
Well, I know that we enjoyed our day hiking a lot, and there's always so many superlatives you can come out. And I wonder what are some of the experiences that you might share if you could pick maybe a couple of favorite moments in hikes that you might want to share with us.
Oh, geez, that's like asking to pick your favorite child, you know? There's
That's
always a
what,
classic saying, I'm a photographer. Oh, so well, what's your favorite hike? Well, it's always the next one, right? Or what's your favorite picture? It's always the next one I take. Yeah, I mean, and I'm not just saying this because you're sitting in front of me, but I think the hike that you, I, and Dan took was probably one of the most memorable I've ever experienced. And you helped me in so many ways, whether or not you know it. For those of you that don't know, guiding Randy is it's an honor, but it's also a lot of work, a lot of joyous work. I I've never looked at a trail as carefully as I had hiking the field. One of the things that you do when you get out into the woods is there's a mindlessness to it and a mindfulness at the same time, where you're kind of emptying your head and really enjoying the experience fully. I did so with you, but on the other hand, I needed to tell you of every dip, branch. I could tell you that trail from start to finish, I think, at this point, without a problem. I know
yeah,
it from head to toe.
I hear that a lot, that people will never look at a trail the same after they've guided me, because to think about how you would describe it, and it just speaks to the power of our mind, in that your brain is doing that same thing for you, but it does it so quickly and naturally because it's learned how to guide you. But when you're trying to think about how am I going to get somebody else's feet through that, when I don't control them, it makes it a lot more complicated. And I'm pretty grateful for the people who guide me, yourself as well, because it's choosing to get that work. But I love that there's often a gift for people who make that choice. So thanks for sharing that. And I'm actually going to change the order of the questions I had in mind a little bit because of what you alluded to, which is, sometimes a tough topic for some folks, but you hinted at it. I think it's so important. I often think of you in the work you do online that I see as a depression advocate of sorts, because of your own experiences and because of your encouragement for others. And I wonder if you'd like to talk about that a little, because I think it can be so helpful for so many of us, especially this year.
Yeah, and it's been an unusual year, and it's funny that I'm a person that usually kind of gets those winter blues, as it were, and this has actually been one of the easiest years I've had, and I don't know why. I don't know whether or not I sort of set myself to flint and sort of saw the scenario in front of me and just got through it the best way that I could, knowing I could.
Right.
To go back to the question, I guess I sort of became, I don't know if advocate's the correct word, but I've always spoken very freely about it. I guess maybe is a better way of explaining it. Because obviously I've been through a couple of major depressions, but my first depression, there really wasn't much said about it. You really couldn't turn anywhere. You really couldn't talk to anybody about it. And I thought that was kind of unusual, because I talk about depression like a toothache, or stubbing your toe or something along those lines. It's just another medical issue that we simply need to get through. So I think it's very important to let people know that I think one of my biggest epiphanies during the course of the depression is when I finally found out that I wasn't alone, that there was a lot of other people who thought the same way. To this day, there has never been a person, and I talk very freely about it, that has ever looked down on me for it, or has ever thought differently of me of it in a bad way. So it's amazing that after you've mentioned that, how many people just say, I've actually been through the same thing myself, or my mom has, or a good friend, or I lost somebody to suicide, or there's always a conversation that seems to continue from there. So I've never had a bad experience with it. So for anybody else that might be going through it, the first step obviously is to speak very freely about it, because it's a medical condition just like anything else.
Yeah, I think you broke up a little bit. I hope you're still with us, but I think I view two things that are really important for me in that world, which is that, when people are sick, they want to do things to get healthy, but sicknesses that are not physical often intimidate people, and emotional or mental challenges make people think that those are taboo and you can't discuss them. And it's sad, because they're the same level of challenge and they need the same type of attention, things that will make healthy. And if you don't deal with them, they're often going to get worse. So I wish people would take that mindset for themselves and for those they care about to look at it that way. And the second thing is people often are afraid to share because they think showing that vulnerability is a weakness.
I think we've
Randy, you
lost Randy.
froze.
Gotcha. So
Back.
I'm the problem here. Am I back or am I not back?
You're
You are
back.
back at the moment.
Okay.
Yeah, let me extrapolate on that comment you were just talking about, Randy. It's a lot of times they don't. There's certain diseases or illnesses they call casserole diseases, where if you get the flu or break an arm, people tend to show up at your door with a casserole, and it's with depression or anxiety or any of those other mental health issues. You very, very rarely have that. It's a very solitary disease. You can't go to the doctor and they can't look inside your head, so to speak. You know, there's brain scans that have come up with certain patterns, but it's not like a broken arm where you can go and they can just fix it because they can see it. It's a very personal experience. Like, that's all I can say.
Right. I hope I'm back. Am I back first? No, I'm still gone,
Yes.
huh?
No, you're
You are?
here.
Okay. Okay, great. Thank you. So I'd love to dig into that deeper, but we just don't have the time in these chats. So I'm going to, that's one of the many reasons I think people should know a little bit more about some of the support material that you're putting out on a constant basis. So I want to switch back and talk about the fact that, I did mention that you were an author first, and you did a lot to help us on the process of how we launched our own book, Tracy and I, and I certainly am grateful for that. It's part of how you give in general. My question to you is, what was your inspiration behind your book, and how can people find your various books, right? Give us the plug so they can find and hopefully read your books as I have and get the benefit that's there.
Yeah, well, they're all available on Amazon. That's the readily available place to buy them. The other choice would be mattlandry.com, which I'll put here in the chat box in a minute so folks can follow that if they went along. As to my inspiration, it was kind of strange. I was never really a writer. I guess people never really think of themselves as writer. I don't know if you went through the same experience yourself, Randy. I started to journal quite a bit, I guess, when I was going through my first depression. And I decided to go back to school, to college, when I was in my mid-40s. And I had a wonderful teacher, an instructor that I had when I decided to take a creative writing course. And she really, really encouraged me to move forward. So I took a lot of the journaling that I did, and that's sort of what became my first book, Learning to Be Human Again. You wouldn't know that unless, obviously, I just told you that. But it had a lot to do with discovering who you are before the world told you who you should be. It's kind of the subtitle. And that was sort of my introduction into the writing world. I released the book for free originally. To your point, I just kind of wanted to get it into people's hands. And it dawned on me that this might very well be a sellable paperback if I chose to do so. And kind of delved in from there. And I really took to it, I guess, it's just, I had a blast doing it, and I still do.
Well, you are definitely an author, and I definitely question whether I'm an author sometimes. I wonder how many books I have to write before that will change, right? It's sort of like a hiker. Well, am I a hiker? I am a hiker now, but it took a lot of hikes before I convinced myself of that. I'm psyched for your books. I'm psyched for all of the experiences you have on that front. But an interesting thing came up when we were at our presentation together, which is a topic, again, that a lot of people avoid, which is spirituality. And, in my own book, I handled that delicately because it's a personal matter for me, and that's how I generally approach it. But I get asked about it enough that I wanted to address it to some extent. And in our presentation, we got asked, and it was a hiking presentation, or primarily, and your answer, was pretty popular up there at the Woodstock station. And I want to invite you to share, to whatever level you're comfortable, some of what you shared with us on your perspective on that.
Yeah, it's funny that we talked briefly about this before we sat down, and when we talked about the Woodstock talk, I don't even remember exactly what I said. It's just funny that it eludes me, but I'll speak freely about it, just as if I were at the Woodstock Inn at this moment. The Woodstock Inn, to let everybody know, gave us free beer that night, so there might have been a bit of a memory lapse near the end. But it was a fun night, that's for sure. No, I think because it was a hiking crowd, it had a lot to do, the spirituality that was spoken about that night, and I still believe to this day, is, to me, going to nature is like going to church, I guess is a good way of putting it, is that my church doesn't necessarily have windows and doors. It's my belief is in a higher being, something that's bigger than us, and whether you want to call that God, the universe, or everyone's got a different version of that, is there's some more powerful energy than all of us out there. Again, this is my personal belief. And I can see that completely in the face and eyes of everyone I meet and in nature. And I think that's an enormous part. You asked, the first question was, why I go hiking quite a bit, or what hiking means to me. And there is a spirituality about getting outside and seeing the creation, as it were, in front of you, directly in front of you, or experiencing it directly in front of you. And I think that is a lot, I feel more spiritual in nature than I do anywhere else. Is that quite similar to yourself?
It's funny. You even said seeing it or experiencing it. And I chuckled on the correction, to include me in that front. And, there's something about awe and wonder that really gives perspective, whether you're looking at the night sky full of stars or the ocean, when you're touching something that just seems so much more vast than yourself, it just gives me perspective on what I feel my place is. And I think humility is so good for all of us. And I've gotten a healthy dose when I went blind, and I get a healthy dose in the woods. And whether that is a part of what helps me find my spirituality or not, I'm not sure. But I know that I feel more comfortable when those things happen as a regular part of my life. So I invite them into my life as often as I can. And yeah, hiking's a part of that, and people are a part of that in the world of, love and kindness, which is kind of my last question for you before I'll turn it over to you and maybe some others to take the floor afterwards. But, aside from your presentations and your writing and your general work in the world of spreading love and kindness to people, I'm always curious, what do you have next for us? And what is the best means for us to be connected, to the best method to know what's going on in the world of Matt Landry, so that we can all benefit from that?
I would say, and I don't upkeep my website as much as I should, but Facebook I'm on very regularly. I think that's my medium that I've chosen, my chosen medium to really try and spread that love and kindness, as it were. Obviously, I try and do it in everyday experiences as well. That's important. And I guess, again, you asked what my catalyst to writing was. I guess the why behind my writing is to try and spread that compassion and love as much as I possibly can. I think that's the main reason that I got into writing. I need to remind myself that's why I continue to write. It was never for the money. It never had that intention behind it. So I think those are the ways that I've tried the best that I can to just, to spread that love and kindness as best I can.
Right. And on the front of what's coming next, is there something coming?
I have a lot of stuff coming up. I always say that I have a self-diagnosed ADHD, and I'm always working on 5 projects at once. And it seems like all of a sudden they all come to fruition. The first book has kind of died out a bit, Learning to Be Human Again. So I decided to repackage it, put a new title, and sort of increase the volume of it quite a bit. And that's going to be coming out in a couple of months. It's going to be called Rediscovering You. It's going to be a brand new sort of version of the old book. And it's funny looking back into my first version of writing and kind of revamping it a little bit has been kind of fun. The next new book that's coming out is called Keep Moving Forward. It's not, I was going to originally make it as sort of a conclusion of forward, upward, onward, but decided against it as a testament to how hiking has sort of changed me. I hiked the 4,000-foot mountains of New Hampshire, for those that may not be familiar, and I wrote a book called Forward, Upward, Onward. Each lesson or each chapter sort of had a mountain I hiked and a lesson or a takeaway behind it. I decided that I was going to do the 48 all over again, and I was going to continue the journey, so to speak, and revisit some old mountains with new trails and new folks, and I was going to write a brand new book about it. The problem is that as I started blogging and doing the new material for it, all of the blogs sort of turned out to be what a great day I had. This is fantastic. The people that I was with was a joy. You know, the weather was stupendous. And I thought, nobody wants to read this. There was no heartache. There was no vulnerability. There was zero in there, which is phenomenal. My confidence level was through the roof. I was just having a blast. And I thought, you know, maybe this is the direction I want to go with this one. So I decided to sort of take the 9 or 10 lessons that I learned, the major lessons that I learned from Forward, Upward, Onward, and sort of present them in a new manner. And I sort of turned it into hiking, because I've hiked all over the United States. I've been very blessed to hike everywhere. So I sort of turned it into that instead. And I've had a blast writing that one as well. And then this fall, I'll have another book coming out called Write That Damn Book. And it's basically, it's going to be encouraging folks to self-publish, how to self-publish and how to get that book out there for folks that always wanted to.
Right. I got the free version of that when we had our conversation. So thanks.
Well, people like you that were a great catalyst for that. I've been asked that a lot, you know, so I thought, you know, there's a need for this. You know, there's some folks that really that need to know this. So it was a catchy title. And I thought to myself, I really got to write this. I got to write my own damn book.
You know, there was a season in my hike in the 48 where we'd go on a hike and we'd have success, and you know, the title was always, or the summit photo had success, and the subject of the blog had success, and my team said, you can no longer use the word success. We're tired of it. I'm like, we're tired of success? But you know, the reality is people read struggle and conflict and overcoming. That matters to them. And that was there too. I just bury that sometimes, because I think even in our successes, there's often a lot of struggle, and we have to make sure that we don't forget that on that journey. So I've thrown my questions at you. Thank you for enduring the 5 and maybe a few sneak peeks in there elsewise. And I want to give you a chance before we invite the audience to either ask via the chat or even come off mute with a hand raise or whatever. But do you have anything you want to ask me before we turn the floor over to them?
I do, and it's funny that it's sort of, this is something I've thought about for a little while, and you've segued perfectly almost into this, is that, you know, most folks seem to find that struggle or discomfort is something that they sort of cower away from quite a bit. It's something that they really don't want to experience, but you found a way to really harness that to your advantage. I kind of did the same thing going through the 48, but obviously you've had much more knowledge behind that than I ever had or experience. I guess the question is, you know, how can we change our mindset to help us embrace the struggles of life that happen every day, never mind the major events?
Sure. I mean, let's be clear. I relish a long stretch of no struggle in my life. If that wants to arrive, I will be thrilled. But, you know, the reality is we all are likely to face challenge in our world. And it's going to have different forms, and it's real for each one of us. And we have to measure it for how it affects us each time. But what I learned in my going blind as one of the first challenges, but certainly in plenty of them, is that challenge gives us a choice, right? We can quit, we can be defeated, but we can grow, we can learn, and we can become something more. And if you do the latter, if you grow, if you learn, if you become something more, you start getting all kinds of rewards from that. And if you do the first part, if you quit, you don't get more rewards. In fact, you start getting, you know, almost punishments for that. And I want to choose the one that's going to let me get the more rewards. And it may be hard to do, but the rewards are going to come from it. And then in that process, what I realized is it's adversity that gives us that opportunity. And it doesn't have to be negative adversity, right? I talk all the time about positive adversity. That's what goals are. Any adversity can do. And the adversity we choose for ourselves is the best type, because then we get something we want and we grow and learn from it. And the best part it does is that is like practice makes progress. It prepares us so that when we do all hit the real challenges we're all going to face, we have the tools, we have the skills mentally, emotionally, physically to take that hard catalyst we didn't necessarily want and turn it to a growth opportunity. So I don't relish those challenges, but I know when they come that there's going to be a reward for it. And that's the mindset I have, is that this is an opportunity. I don't like it. It may bring some bad things, but I know that it's going to bring the bad things because it's here. If I quit, I have the bad things and nothing else. If I choose to grow, I have the bad things I couldn't avoid and all the growth I can get from it as well.
I like that. Let me extrapolate on that slightly if I could. I like the term planned adversity. So you're not necessarily looking for a struggle, but you're looking to plan something similar and really tackle that true struggle that comes to you.
Sure. And I planned adversity, positive adversity. It's what a goal is. It's what everything. You're writing a book is positive adversity. You're gonna have to work hard to do it, but you're choosing that, and it hopefully will bring a lot of rewards to you.
Yeah, I love it.
What else do you have for me, or have I cleared the slate?
You have cleared the slate, my friend. I think we're free for the peanut gallery.
Great. Then I do want to invite all those who've been kind enough to join us on a Friday evening. If you would like to ask Matt a question, if you have a question for me, the topics are wide open. You can enter them into the chat panel and Robbie or Tracy will read them to us. Or if you'd like, you can raise your hand. Alt-Y will raise your hand if you're on a PC. Or you can literally raise your hand and they'll call you out so you can unmute and give you a moment to think about that.
I'm drinking tea, by the way. This is not whiskey or anything.
Well, I wouldn't object either way. Although I've got a healthy diet of water going on in my life right now.
Matt, I was worried you were caffeinating with coffee, so tea's better.
So I am not seeing any hands.
It's a gentle crowd. They all want to go out and enjoy the last of the warm weather tonight.
I don't blame them.
So Randy, classically though, I have questions.
Love it. And maybe you'll inspire somebody. What do you have for us, Robbie?
So I have like little kid questions because I'm always excited about, learning new things about people. So Matt, you're talking about book after book after book. How many books have you written?
I've actually written 4 completed that are out there physically, and I have 3 more that are coming down the pipe, but hopefully by the end of the year.
Wow. I was thinking about you, starting off with your writing, and I love the title of one of your books, The Discovering Who You Are Before the World Told You Who to Be. Who did you decide you were? Who did the world tell you were?
Oh, geez, that's a very personal question. I don't even know if I have an answer for that, by the way.
Is it in the book?
It's not in the book. It's more about you. It's more about finding out who you are. That's a very individual question.
I see who you are.
What else you have for us, Robbie? And
hold on, I'm looking at my list.
Robbie's a teacher, by the way, Matt, in case you can't tell. That's why the mindset goes to questions so quickly.
So I guess I was thinking about your process around writing books. And as a teacher, I'm like, ooh, how do I get them into my class to talk to my students about writing? But on top of that, I'm thinking about you started with journaling, and now I know that you're doing this online and kind of blogging it for yourself, and that has its own challenges of, it was a great time. Do you still journal? How did you transition from one to the other? I'm just curious about your whole process.
I actually don't journal anymore, and it's funny that because a lot of my books deal with vulnerability and sort of lessons in life. Mm-hmm. I guess my journaling is my writing now. That all sort of comes out in one way or another. It's funny that you talk about a blog. When I started writing Forward, Upward, Onward, it was a blog. I got to maybe peak 25 or 26 or something, and somebody just said, when are you releasing that as a book? And I just said, these are just accounts of kind of the hikes that I took and maybe the lessons I took from it. I was going through this at the time. This is the lesson I learned from this particular hike. That I said, nobody's going to buy this. I said, it's just a blog, But after a little coercing, I finally decided to release it. So it's almost in its original blog form, where it's dates, the mountain I hiked, with the lesson learned at the end, next mountain. So that was a very blog form book, and people don't realize that it's very easy. I think people like that book as well because it's small chunks. You can take it in small bites if you want.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I guess the other thing I can tell you about a writing process is that people are always amazed that somebody could write a book. And I'm not saying that, grandiosely by any means, but people don't realize that if you just take the time to write 500 words a day, which is really nothing in the grand scheme of things, mm-hmm. You could have a book in 2 months.
Wow.
It's not as big a deal as people think. It's like, it's like eating an elephant. You need to take it one bite at a time. Once you break it down really, really, just the small pieces like that, it makes a big difference. And hire a good editor. It was amazing that and a good editor can really put your work together. You don't need to be Shakespeare in order to put a book out either by any means. So
that's great. In the chat, Dan says it seems like sometimes you have a new book coming out every week. Thanks,
a
Dan.
lot of them are revising old books but yeah, I try to keep busy. Dan is another author as well. For those that don't know Dan Sesney, he's the gentleman that was with Randy and I at the presentation we did at the Woodstock Inn, and he's written some phenomenal works himself. So, hey, Dan.
Dan turns a phrase so beautifully. It is fantastic. And it is humbling to read, from my perspective, is that Dan is a writer. And I feel like the hack that had a story of a life that had some value to it. And if I could turn phrases like Dan, then I could be a writer. So that, going back to that discussion, that's where it goes. But Dan is a phenomenal writer, and I'm glad to see that he's getting some syndicated work out there and more books steadily. So thanks for joining us tonight, Dan.
Oh, I would like to actually jump in with a question, hopefully before my dog starts talking again. Matt, accepting the two other authors currently on this call, do you have a favorite author of your own?
Michael Singer has actually been one of my favorites. I'm almost exclusively a nonfiction kind of guy. So Michael Singer is actually one of my favorites that I've ever read before. He's high up there on the list. It's funny that I don't read maybe as much as I used to or should, considering how much I write anymore. I'm not saying this case is in front of me, but actually Dan, as Randy had mentioned, is also one of my favorite authors. I consider myself an author. Dan is not only an author, but he's a writer, as Randy said,
I don't know if Dan can take much more of this, though. He's like shaking his head.
I think he wanted to chime in for a second. I think Dan.
You come out here just to enjoy a couple of my favorite authors, and all of a sudden, I'm going to make the screen go black so you don't pay attention to
Well, you know what? We're almost at the end.
Thank you. I appreciate that very much. Thank you.
I do actually have another question from a participant.
Yep.
For Matt. Matt, having hiked in other areas across the U.S., could you share some comparative thoughts between the New Hampshire hiking community and other hiking communities?
I've never really been a big part of communities in any of the other hiking areas I've been in. I hate to admit it. I've really stuck to this area because obviously this is where I live and I've been brought up. The hiking conditions are a lot different, I can tell you, out there, but hiking communities I really haven't hooked into. I spent a lot of time in Moab, Utah, and I can tell you that is a hiker's mecca and a biker's mecca out there. Although I never made true friends out there, I had a blast because there's not much difference between those folks and the folks out here. And I think if you talk to a lot of folks that have experienced either or, I think hikers are hikers. I think you're going to find that almost no matter where you go, there's that love of the outdoors.
Yeah, and I think there are different types of hikers for sure, here and there, and so you do get a different variety. But in general, I think the general archetype that is a hiker is very similar there. I do just want to shout out how much smoother and easier I have found every trail outside of New England. I know we've both hiked the Grand Canyon just as an example. And I'm just like, this is a highway. I can just glide around this as opposed to twisty, rocky, rooty. Randy's going to break an ankle every step of the way here in New England, right? We're stream beds is what we're hiking up, and with few switchbacks.
I had to manage my pace a lot better because I'm like a metronome out here. I can really set a pace and as an exact pace. But when you get out there, you try and keep that same pace, but you're walking up a giant ramp basically.
Yeah.
And that's exhausting. It's far more than people think. If you don't slow it down a little bit, you wear yourself out almost quicker than a mountain out here.
Well, then, any other questions before I get to wrap up this evening?
Dan has one.
Yep.
Hey, Matt, talk a little bit about the Grand Canyon. I know that's a place that has a deep and spiritual pull for you.
It does. It's one of the few places. I took a road trip when I was maybe 20, 21 years old, and I had never been out of Massachusetts. I'd probably been to New York before, and I always thought New York was the West. Let's put it that way. To finally head out on this great road trip with an old friend, and who we're still friends to this day, and really experience that entire adventure. It was the first time I saw the Grand Canyon. It was July 4th, and it was about as packed as it got. But it was one of the first natural wonders that absolutely just took my breath away, physically and literally. And I've probably been back maybe 15 or 16 times. It's tough to explain the spirituality that's there. One of my last titles, not to keep plugging books here, but one of the last titles I put out for a book was Casting Your Troubles into the Grand Canyon. And it had a lot to do with just the vastness of that crevasse in front of you, that it just seems to suck your problems out of you. Just your worries seem to go away. And it's that whole spirituality, the universe, creativity in front of you thing going on that you just don't get anywhere else. It's just, it's mind boggling for those that have never been. You got to go. It's unbelievable. For me, though, it is, with the exception of the White Mountains of New Hampshire, it is my happy place. It is my spiritual place. It is it's my Mecca. I don't know how else to say that.
One of the beautiful gifts at the Grand Canyon, I'd had lots of descriptions of it given to me, and then again there in the moment when the emotion comes. But something I didn't know that is apparently very common is that because of the river down below, there's often a lot of mist and fog and clouds, and there's often a rainbow that will form coming out of one end and dropping back down into the other end of the Grand Canyon. It's almost a daily occurrence, they say, and Tracy got to describe that to me while we were there for our honeymoon, and I'm like, oh, it's not beautiful enough. It has to have a rainbow emerging from and returning to it while we're here, right? So
one of my fondest memories of the Grand Canyon was I was at the North Rim, and it was like when you head out there from the East Coast, 4 o'clock in the morning is really 7 o'clock back here. So you wake up, it seems like in the middle of the night. When I headed down to the rim, and there was a thunderstorm approaching way off in the distance, 40 or 50 miles away. And you've never seen a thunderstorm where you can physically see the clouds with all the thunder and the lightning just erupting from out of it. And to my left, the sun was rising because it's such a vast area. So I'm watching this sunset, a lightning storm. It was absolutely, breathtaking. I sat and mesmerized for hours.
Right back to those awe-inspiring moments. Well, you've
Yep.
given us some inspiring moments as well, Dan. Robbie, Tracy, how do we look? Are we good?
Think so. I don't see any other questions, Tracy.
Well,
I do not either.
so let me thank everyone for joining us tonight. Let me especially thank Matt for choosing to join us tonight. I want to give one more shout out to our sponsor, Boston Billiard Club and Casino. And I also want to give one special shout out to the team of people at 2020 Vision Quest. That includes Robbie and Tracy, Carolina, who was here earlier, but there's a whole team. And I so often get to be, the front-facing part of our charity work. But all of the really good stuff doesn't happen. All of the many great successes we've had doesn't happen without all of their work and effort. And they don't ever get half enough of the attention because they do it for love of the mission, sometimes because they love me, even though my wife might not want to admit that all the time. And I feel really fortunate for a great team around me. And Matt, I think you're part of that team and all the support you've given me as well. So thanks, everyone. Have a great night and be well.